Indra Nooyi, Denise Morrison and Meg Whitman are just a few of the female CEOs departing their corporate jobs recently. Our next guest's advice to women in business is to skip the corporate ladder altogether and build their own corporation. Let's bring in Nathalie Molina Niño, founder and CEO of Brava Investments, also the author of LEAPFROG, the new revolution for women entrepreneurs. Good morning to you, Nathalie. Thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
And the take of this is that men use shortcuts to get ahead. What are those shortcuts, and should women be copying those shortcuts, or is it something that men shouldn't be doing and should be kind of pushed out of the workplace?
We could argue the different strategies. I think it's B. I think that instead of maligning people who do have trust funds, who have savings accounts, who can fund their own businesses, who can fund their friends and family's businesses, what we need is our own hacks. And so the book is essentially 50 versions of shortcuts that I think women entrepreneurs can and need to use now.
The trust fund one I find interesting because I was reading that in the summaries and stuff, because surely that's a sort of class issue, a wealth issue. It's not a male versus female issue, is it?
Well, what's happening is even among wealthy families, the men tend to inherit the part of the family offices that invest, and the women tend to inherit the philanthropic side of the family offices. And so actually some of these capital sources, even with families with wealth, are not that readily available to women. This
must be applying, though, to 1% of the population. So what is the fix for the people that aren't in that 1%?
Which is to say most Americans,
right?
I mean, this is one of the things that got me, is that there wasn't a book anywhere, a business book, enabling people and even speaking to people in the United States that meets them where they are. What we know about the shrinking middle class, what we know about the average savings account of most Americans, is that even things like the name of the round, which we call in finance the friends and family round, kind of irrelevant for 95% of Americans who don't have savings accounts, who don't have friends and family who can write checks, right?
Nathalie, we had somebody on last week who said a big part of the problem is when you're going up to find these VC funders, most of them are white men. She was making the point that for African-American women, it's particularly difficult to get any funding. And in fact, when African-American woman gets funded by them, it tends to be about $60,000 on average versus over $1 million that a man's going to get.
And difficult is an understatement, right? Because we hear the numbers tossed around 2, 5. I think last year it was 2.5% of venture capital going to women. But what people aren't really talking about is that it's actually 0.2% for African-American women, for example. So difficult is an understatement. We're completely out of the equation. And so I think that in that case, we go to other sources. So for example, one of my hacks is women are disproportionately more successful at getting crowdfunding money. So, you know, let's double down on that. Let's find other ways to get capital.
And you talk as well about women taking on more debt. Is that something that it's based on mentality, that they don't wish to do that, or that banks aren't lending to them? Or what's the problem there and what's the fix?
It's a combination of all of those things. I think that one of the biggest things, though, is, we have a perception that debt is a bad thing, right? And yet no startup gets ahead, no startup is successful without a nice balanced capital stack. You've got some venture capital. If you go that route, you've got some debt. And I think what happens is, yes, women are not getting the loans, but there are also resources like SBA loans and all sorts of other products that we're not taking advantage of, partly because you make it to the covers of things when you close a Series A. Nobody's celebrating you when you close a line of credit, right? It's not perceived as sexy, and it's often not talked about.
And I hate to get too gender specific, but we've also talked about books that have been written that say women are great investors because they're more risk averse, and that could be the counter issue here. If you're not willing to take a risk and take on some of that debt personally, gets you in a harder tough. And again, we're talking gender specifics, and I hate doing that, but that's the whole point of the book.
You know, what studies have actually found is that it's not so much that women are risk averse, is that they take risks at different points. They take risk at different stages. They take risks for different reasons. I guarantee you a woman taking a risk for something that's going to better the life of her kids, of her family, is not going to be risk averse at all. So it really depends on context. But, you know, it's true. Women do run businesses differently. And the reality is the way that the numbers pan out, we should be tripping over ourselves to invest, to loan, to basically, you know, seed the ecosystem of what is ultimately the most entrepreneurial community of all, which is not just women entrepreneurs who are starting more companies than anybody else, but specifically 8 out of every 10 women-owned businesses in this country is started by a Black or brown woman. It's the most undervalued asset right under our noses that we should be putting money into.
Okay, Nathalie, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
New book, LEAPFROG, is out now.